Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. Happy Wednesday morning to you. Hope your week is going great so far. Mine's been wonderful. All right. So, appreciate you being with me. Once again, I've got a long way to go. Want to get back to Matthew chapter 12, 38 and following. We are continuing our discussion of the Olivet Discourse. All right. It is almost universally, it's changing, but almost universally believed that Matthew 25, 1 to 13 is talking about Christ coming at the end of the current Christian age. Which is really strange, by the way. The coming of the bridegroom would be to confirm and to consummate the wedding covenant. Okay? Confirm and to consummate. Not to put an end, but to consummate the wedding covenant. And yet here commentators say, the coming of the Lord in Matthew chapter 25, 1 to 13, is Christ coming at the end of the current Christian age. Is Christ going to come to put an end to the new covenant, wedding covenant, marriage covenant? Doesn't even make good nonsense, does it? Okay, so anyway, Matthew 25 is the story of the coming of the Lord for the wedding. 5 wise, 5 foolish virgins. Lying behind that is the story of Israel. Her wedding, her marriage to Yahweh, the divorcement of the 10 southern tribes, and the coming divorcement of the 2 southern tribes, Judah, in the last days, when she would become an adulterous wife, just like the 10 northern tribes had become an adulterous wife, and just like Yahweh had divorced the 10 northern tribes, departed from the 10 northern tribes, put to death the 10 northern tribes, he was going to give Judah the same harvest. And this is where the paradox comes in. Because in the same discussions of the divorcement of Judah, the death of Judah, the destruction of Judah in the last days, we find the promise of a new marriage, of a new wedding covenant. Hosea 2, 18 and following. We're dealing now with Judah. Remember, the 10 northern tribes have been carried off. Now, a remnant of them came back in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. We know that because 12 sacrifices were offered for all 12 tribes at the return and at the building of the temple. But you see, that's not the gathering of the wedding. That period of time and that physical return is never couched in terms of the remarriage of Israel. That's highly significant. So I've been showing you that in Matthew, in the Gospels, Jesus is dealing with Judah and Benjamin. I've shown you last couple of days where Jesus in Matthew chapter 12, 38 and following refers to Judah and Benjamin as this wicked and adulterous generation 3 times. Matthew 12, Matthew 16, Mark 8. Jesus referred to his generation as this adulterous generation. Now, as I said to you, said yesterday, ladies and gentlemen, that was not coincidental language. Jesus was not using that language flippantly or lightly. He was hearkening Deuteronomy 32. He was hearkening back to Ezekiel 16, Ezekiel 23, Jeremiah chapter 3, Isaiah 51 and through 54. He was referring back to all of those Old Covenant prophecies of Israel's adultery, Israel's harlotry, and the last days when Judah would do the same thing. Just as Israel filled up the measure of her adultery and was nationally destroyed, guess what? Judah in her last days would likewise fill up the measure of her adultery and be judged. Just as Jesus said, a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, but no sign shall be given except the sign of Jonah. The men of Nineveh will rise up with this generation. The queen of the south shall rise up with this generation in the judgment. Now, look at verse 43 through 45. This is not a break. Jesus is continuing his discussion of Judah being the wicked, adulterous generation. And he says, when an unclean spirit goes out of a man and goes through dry places seeking rest and finds none, then he says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and garnished, and put in order, in other words. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits, watch this, more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there, and the last state of that man shall be worse than the first. Now catch the power of this. So it shall be with this generation. Jesus was saying exactly what he said or would say in Matthew chapter 23 when he said to the Jews who were going to kill him, they had persecuted the prophets, they were going to persecute and kill his apostles and prophets, and in doing so, they were going to fill up the measure of their sin. And he said, verily I say unto you, all of these things, all of what things? All of the blood of all of the righteous shed on the earth from righteous Abel unto Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom they had slain between the temple and the altar. Actually, some believe it hadn't been done yet, and it was to be done in the very near future. But all of that aside, point being, all of these things shall come upon this generation. Not upon this kind of people, because this kind of people generically doesn't fill up the measure of the guilt of killing the prophets, of killing Jesus, and killing Jesus' apostles and prophets. Some generic wicked people don't do that. A very specific people did that. And it was that very specific people that was going to fill up, just like the 10 northern tribes filled up the measure of their sin for killing the prophets, by the way, 2 Kings. And Judah and Benjamin was going to fill up the measure of their sin. That generation was to be the worst. Well, if that generation was to be worst, and it's the wicked and adulterous generation, if it's the generation that would fill up the measure of its sin, what did that mean? It meant, just like Deuteronomy 32 foretold, it would be Israel's last end. It would be the time in which God would put old covenant Judah to death. He would depart from that old covenant form. He would put her to death. He would divorce her. He would depart from her. He would put her to death. Oh, but wait. But wait. Remember? The Old Testament messianic kingdom prophecies was that there would be a new covenant. Not like the old. Nothing like the old. And it would be with both houses of Israel Oh, and guess what? Anyone and everyone of any nation could then come in and enjoy the salvation. You see, what we find throughout the Gospels is Jesus dealing with the last generation of Judah. When she had become the harlot, when she had become the adulteress, and judgment, her harvest was about to come, and it did come. And so tomorrow, on the flip side, we will go to the book of Revelation, where John is given the revelation from Jesus, who got it from the Father. And John was being given the revelation about a harlot, an adulterous bride, and the impending judgment, the impending harvest of that harlot, adulterous wife, and then the ensuing wedding at the coming of the Lord of Matthew 25, 1 to 13. So, I'll see you on the flip side.